This happened a few years ago, and I still can't shake the feeling of unease that lingers after that night. I work as a night attendant in one of the stores on the outskirts of the city. It's not the most popular place, and visitors rarely come after 11 p.m. The store was located in an empty shopping mall where most businesses closed around 8 to 9 p.m., so after that time, I was practically alone. That night started out like any other, and I was used to being by myself in the store. I sat behind the counter, reading books or watching videos, trying not to think too much about how tired I was. Usually, it was quiet, and occasionally I'd hear distant sounds from the air vents or faint noises from nearby stores that were still open, but that was rare. But that night, everything changed. I heard footsteps, clear, distinct footsteps, sounding as though someone was walking down the corridor. But this was an empty shopping center, and I knew all the surrounding stores had already closed. My store was the last one still open, and no one else was around in this area at that hour. At first, I thought it might be just some random noise like from the ventilation or echoes off the walls. But the footsteps grew louder and more regular, as if someone was walking down the corridor toward my store. My heart started to race. I checked the time, 3:22 a.m. This was the latest I usually worked, and I was getting ready to wrap things up. I sat in silence, listening, and again heard the footsteps. They didn't stop. They were getting closer. I decided to go check the door and look out the window to see if anyone was outside in the parking lot or in the hall. I saw nothing, but the footsteps didn't stop. They were much closer now. My heart was pounding. I turned back to the store and checked all the doors and windows to make sure everything was in place. I started thinking maybe it was just my imagination, the fatigue, or nerves from being alone. But those clear footsteps kept going, and that only made me more anxious. With each passing minute, the sound of the footsteps grew closer. They were so loud now, I could hear them echoing on the floor. I decided to walk through the store and check everything. Each step, each sound now felt louder and more threatening. I tried to figure out if it was just a normal noise, or maybe a worker or customer who had come in late. The footsteps kept coming, and I started to feel like someone was walking right toward my counter. I hesitated, but eventually moved cautiously toward the counter and saw footprints on the floor. Dirty shoe prints. I remembered that I hadn't seen anyone come into the store after the last customer. They were headed straight toward my counter. I couldn't believe my eyes. I quickly checked the entire store again. All the doors were locked, and nothing seemed disturbed. But those prints were there, on the floor, right by the counter. My breathing was getting shallow. I felt like someone for sure had been in the store while I wasn't looking. Then I heard new footsteps, and they started getting closer again. They were loud and sounded like someone was walking right toward me. I couldn't stay in the store any longer and risk whatever was happening. I decided to leave, not caring if I was being paranoid. I grabbed my bag quickly, unsure if I should even bother locking up. The fear overtook my thoughts. I rushed out the door, only to notice that the footprints were outside, next to my car. Those prints led me back to the store, and I couldn't bring myself to go back inside. I didn't even want to think about it until the next day, when I tried to find a logical explanation for what had happened. I still couldn't explain that night, and I still wonder if it was real or if I just imagined it from exhaustion and stress. But I never worked there at night again, and now it's hard for me to even walk past that mall. A few months ago, I moved into a new apartment. It was in a rather old building on the outskirts of the city. It was one of those typical Soviet-era buildings with thick walls that seemed to absorb every sound and creaky floors that groaned with every step. Everyone living in the area often mentioned how quiet and peaceful it was, so I was thrilled to finally find an apartment I could afford. It was spacious, with large windows that let in soft streetlight at night, and even had a small balcony. Everything seemed perfect for a peaceful life after a long day at work. However, the first few nights, I noticed something strange. I was always tired after work, so I'd fall asleep quickly. But a few times, I woke up in the middle of the night to faint footsteps outside my door. At first, I thought it was just a noise from the neighbors, or maybe even something I had left out of place. But one evening, when I was sitting on the couch watching TV, I heard someone walking in the hallway again. The sound was distinct, not like the usual creaks from old pipes or the wind. It was specific, and I thought the steps were getting closer to my door. I sat still, straining to listen, but nothing else came. It was so real that I started to question my own senses. Could it be just the sounds of the old building? The next night, after I heard the same footsteps again, I decided to check things for myself. I quietly got out of bed, closed the door behind me, and cautiously made my way to the window. Everything was silent, just the soft moonlight reflecting on the floor. I returned to the bedroom, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Then things got even stranger. Over the next few nights, I began hearing not just footsteps, but also a faint rustling sound, as if someone was searching for something in the hallway, maybe a blanket or something else. I thought it could be the wind or the old doors creaking, but the sounds became more regular. I tried talking to my neighbors, but they all seemed genuinely surprised and assured me they hadn't heard anything like that. A few times I decided to leave my door slightly open to see if anyone was actually walking in the hall, but every time I opened the door, everything was quiet. I thought maybe it was just my imagination, but the situation kept repeating itself. One evening, I decided to do something unusual. I left my phone camera recording, aimed at the door. If there was a noise, I would catch it on video. I lay in bed, trying to stay awake, but eventually drifted off. When I woke up in the morning, the camera was off, but there were no video files, not even remnants of data. I checked my phone several times, thinking it had malfunctioned, but I couldn't find any explanation for it. Then one day, when I came home, I noticed something strange on my bed. Small footprints. It wasn't something big, but the fact that they led directly to the edge of the bed and stopped there sent a chill down my spine. I was sure I hadn't placed anything on the bed, and my door had been locked. I tried to figure out what could have caused it. Could it have been a cat, or maybe one of the neighbors? But everything seemed too strange. I decided to inspect the whole apartment, looking for possible explanations. I went through each room, even checked the ventilation, but found nothing suspicious. I checked the locks on the doors to make sure they were working properly. Everything seemed fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. And then, one day, I received a message on my phone. At first, it seemed like just another spam or promotional message, but when I saw the number, which I didn't recognize, I felt uneasy. The message was short. "I know you're here." I couldn't understand what it meant or how this number had gotten into my contacts. I felt a wave of fear wash over me. There was no explanation for this message. I decided to change my number and ask my friends to check if they had accidentally passed on the contact. No one could explain where it came from. But after that, I no longer heard footsteps, didn't see any more footprints on the bed, and didn't get any more messages. I'm not sure whether it was just a coincidence or if I was truly disturbed by some kind of perception error. But after that, everything calmed down, and I didn't notice anything strange anymore. I may never understand what happened during those few weeks, but it was undoubtedly one of the most unusual and unexplainable experiences of my life. I never considered myself a coward. I've been living alone for a few years now, used to the silence and darkness, to the nighttime sounds of my old house. My neighborhood had always been quiet. After 10 in the evening, you'd rarely see anyone outside, except for the occasional passerby or a neighbor coming home from work. I was working on my laptop when I happened to glance at the clock. 2:24 a.m. As always, I had stayed up too late. I stretched, getting ready to finally go to bed when I heard it. A knock on the door. I tensed up. It was quiet, almost too quiet for a sound like that. It didn't resemble a neighbor's knock or the accidental creak of the wind. The knocking was distinct, rhythmic, yet somehow cautious, as if someone didn't want to attract too much attention. I held my breath and listened. Nothing. Logic told me it was probably just a mistake, someone confusing the doors or a neighbor playing a joke. But something inside me wouldn't let it go. I stepped closer and carefully peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty. For a second, I thought I had imagined it. I turned away, but then another knock, a little louder this time. I looked through the peephole again. Now, the hallway light seemed dimmer, as if something was absorbing it. And that's when I noticed the shadow. A barely visible silhouette stood right by my door, pressed against the wall. I recoiled. Someone was there. My fingers anxiously tapped at my phone screen, opening the camera feed from my door. The image loaded slower than usual, as if the system itself was trying to warn me. When it finally loaded, my breath caught in my throat. A man was standing in front of my door. He wore a black jacket, his hood covering most of his face. He was leaning forward, almost pressed against the door. He was listening. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. It felt like he sensed my gaze through the camera because he shifted slightly, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His hands remained at his sides, but I knew he was planning something. Time stretched endlessly. I tried to convince myself that this was just a misunderstanding. Maybe just a random stranger who got lost or was looking for someone. But then he slowly lifted his hand and touched the door. His fingers slid across the wood, as if feeling its texture. Then they moved to the handle. I didn't know what to do. If he didn't know I was here, maybe I shouldn't give myself away. But if he did, he pressed the handle. The door trembled. The lock held. I felt blood rush to my face. A second later, he tried again, and then again. He was trying to get in. My heart pounded in my chest. I focused on keeping my breathing steady, so my fear wouldn't betray me. I looked at my phone. Should I call the police? But what would I even say? There's a man just standing at my door. My legs trembled. I tried to remember if I had locked all the bolts. Yes, I was sure I had. But was I really sure? Suddenly, the hallway light switched on with a loud click. The man froze. Then, without a sound, he turned and quickly walked down the stairs. I stood there for another 10 minutes, staring at the camera, trying to figure out if he would come back. Then, finally, I found the courage to call the police. 20 minutes later, a patrol arrived. They searched the building, but found no one. They told me it was probably just a homeless person or someone looking for an easy target. The next day, I installed an extra lock and a new camera. But most importantly, since that night, if someone knocks on my door at night, I don't answer.